The steak was flawless. A5 Wagyu, imported from Japan, perfect marbling, sear edge caramelized to surgical precision. $240. They expected him to eat it. They expected him to get sick. They expected him to look small. They expected no one to believe him. But when the folded paper touched his palm, Frank Grant didn't feel fear. He felt confirmation. He didn't reach for the knife. He didn't call anyone. He didn't react. He waited. Because powerful people don't explode. They document. And within the hour, a decision he made would fracture his own empire. Not publicly. Not loudly. But permanently. Frank Grant built one of the largest luxury dining groups in America on a principle he repeated in every shareholder letter. Dignity is not a tiered service. He said it so often it became brand language. Investors loved it. Customers admired it. Employees quoted it. But something had started rotting underneath. 3 complaints from one flagship location, La Meridian, had vanished. Not resolved. Not escalated. Deleted. And then came the email. No signature. No IP trace. Just one line. If you don't come yourself, you'll never see it. Attached security footage. A man in worn clothing, seated near the service corridor. Whispers. A manager leaning close to a chef. A plate prepared off-camera. Laughter. The man later escorted out, pale and unsteady. No incident report filed. No medical follow-up logged. No record. That silence bothered Frank more than the footage. Silence meant design. So he did something he hadn't done in 35 years. He removed himself from visibility. No tailored suits. No security detail. No board notification. Just old clothes from storage, a faded jacket, shoes with softened heels, no watch, no ring, no car service. His assistant Diana watched from the penthouse doorway. You could send compliance. Compliance gets rehearsals, Frank replied. I want instinct. Across the street from La Meridian, Diana parked with legal counsel and a live recording channel ready. Frank walked in alone. The room did not gasp. It recalibrated. Conversations softened just slightly. The hostess smiled, but not fully. A quick visual assessment. Not profitable. Not important. Ricky Thornton appeared within seconds. Ricky never yelled. Never insulted. Never broke policy in ways that could be quoted. He specialized in tone. Sir, he said smoothly, this establishment may not align with your expectations. Translation, leave. Frank placed a stack of cash on the podium. The Wagyu A5, medium rare. Money overrides discomfort. But hierarchy finds other routes. Ricky led him past prime seating. Past the skyline view. Past the central dining space. To a table near the service corridor. Close enough to hear dishwashing clatter. Close enough to smell the trash hallway when the door opened. Embarrassment without confrontation. Frank sat and observed. Not the menu. The room. Camera angles. Server assignments. Body language shifts. Because culture is visible if you know how to read it. And someone else was reading him. Sonia Williams moved through the dining room like part of the architecture. Efficient. Precise. Unnoticed unless required. Single mother. Medical bills stacked in careful envelopes. 2 part-time shifts just to hold the apartment. She had mastered invisibility. But the man in worn clothing didn't move like someone defeated. His posture was controlled. his eyes too alert. He wasn't shrinking. He was measuring. When she entered the kitchen corridor, she wasn't meant to hear Ricky. Use the one that sat. No one credible. Complaints disappear. The chef hesitated. Ricky's silence after that was enough. Authority doesn't need volume. Sonia's stomach tightened. Mishandled meat doesn't always look wrong. It just needs to be slightly unsafe. Enough for nausea. Enough for doubt. Enough for a complaint no one believes. She stepped into the restroom, locked the door, stared at herself under unforgiving fluorescent light. If she interfered, Ricky could fire her instantly. And in hospitality, managers talk. Blacklists aren't official. They're understood. Her daughter's medication was due next week. Her rent auto-drafted in 5 days. Integrity doesn't pay bills, but it decides who you are when the bills are gone. She tore a strip from her order pad. Don't eat it, it was switched intentionally. No signature. No emotion. Just warning. The steak arrived looking perfect. Butter glossed the surface. Steam rising. A masterpiece. She set it down gently. Your Wagyu, sir. As she placed the fork beside the plate, the folded note slid into his hand. Her face didn't change. Neither did his. He waited until she stepped away. Unfolded the paper beneath the table. Read it once. Then again. His jaw didn't tighten. His pulse didn't spike. Because this wasn't surprise. It was proof. Negligence is laziness. Intention is culture. And culture grows only when leadership stops looking. He slid the plate slightly away, then pressed his heel gently into the floor. A nearly invisible movement. Across the street, Diana's phone vibrated. Live transmission active. Legal channel recording. 20 minutes passed. The steak cooled. Ricky approached with polished concern. Is there an issue with your meal? Frank looked up slowly. If someone were harmed intentionally in this restaurant, he asked quietly, how would you handle it? Ricky didn't blink. We uphold the highest standards. Delivered smoothly. Practiced. The lie wasn't emotional. It was structural. Frank stood. And when he did, the room felt it. Not because he raised his voice, but because presence shifted. My name, he said evenly, is Frank Grant. Recognition spread in waves. A couple near the window froze. A man at the bar turned fully around. Ricky's face emptied. I own this company. No anger. No theatrics. Frank placed a small recorder on the table. And I've been documenting since I entered. The doors opened. Diana. Legal counsel. Regional director. Independent food safety auditor. No shouting. No chaos. Just precision. Ricky attempted composure. Frank raised one hand. The instruction in the kitchen was clear. Compliance confirmed audio. Live. Within minutes, internal data began surfacing. 3 prior guest illnesses. All settled quietly. None escalated. Settlement agreements structured below reporting thresholds. Not an accident. A system. And that's when Frank felt something colder than anger. Not betrayal. Failure. Because corruption that grows under your name is still yours. Seal the location, he said calmly. Full forensic audit, 2 years of communications, vendor sourcing review, staff interviews off-site. Ricky wasn't fired on the spot. He was escorted. Which was worse? Because termination ends a story. Investigation expands it. Sonia stood near the service station, expecting retaliation. Instead, Frank walked toward her. "You warned a stranger." She swallowed. "I warned a person." "You understood the risk." She nodded once. "I've been the person no one believed." That landed differently. He studied her carefully. "Leadership isn't loud. It's costly. Would you be willing," he asked, "to help me find out how deep this goes?" Her eyes sharpened slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means this wasn't isolated." He glanced toward the sealed kitchen. "It means someone believed I would never show up." And that bothered him more than the stake. He offered her protected status under corporate review. Paid leave. Training. Compliance oversight role. Not charity. Authority. She didn't answer immediately. Because stepping into power means stepping into exposure. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because you move toward risk," Frank replied. "Most people move away." By midnight, La Meridian was closed. By 2 a.m., former employees began sending anonymous messages. By 4 a.m., legal discovered something worse. An internal compliance officer had downgraded multiple complaints across different states. Same pattern. Same language. Same silence. This wasn't one manager. It was insulation. And insulation exists to protect something higher. Frank stood alone in his penthouse before sunrise, holding the original anonymous email. He thought he was correcting one location, but the email had known something. "If you don't come yourself." That line wasn't about curiosity. It was about exposure. Because whoever sent it understood. The rot wasn't in the kitchen. It was closer to the boardroom. And if that was true, then the stake was never the point. It was bait. By 7:12 a.m., the board was already calling. Frank ignored the first 3 calls. Answered the 4th. Why was a flagship location shut down without consultation? One director demanded. Frank stood by the penthouse window, overlooking the city his restaurants helped redefine. "Because consultation is what allowed it to grow," he replied calmly. Silence. Another voice cut in. "PR exposure alone could cost us $40 million. Frank didn't blink. If silence was cheaper, we wouldn't be here. What the board didn't know yet was worse than the kitchen audio. Overnight forensic review had uncovered a pattern. Not just suppressed complaints, reclassified complaints, downgraded severity codes, internal notes altered minutes after submission, and every change traced back to one executive compliance officer. Martin Halstead, 10 years inside the company. Meticulous, trusted, invisible. The man responsible for ensuring dignity standards were upheld. The same man who had quietly adjusted 3 incident reports from La Meridian and 9 others across different states. Different managers. Same template. Insufficient evidence. Guessed exaggeration. No further escalation required. Too consistent. Too clean. Frank didn't feel betrayed. He felt challenged. Because this wasn't incompetence. This was architecture. Sonia arrived at corporate headquarters under a temporary clearance badge. The building looked different from inside. Glass marble framed mission statements. Dignity is not a tiered service. She almost laughed. Diana met her in the lobby. "You're protected under whistleblower policy now," Diana said quietly. "Protected," Sonia repeated. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like being visible. Inside a secure conference room, investigators replayed the kitchen audio. Ricky's voice. Clear, Measured. Use the one that sat. Sonia's stomach tightened again. But then the screen shifted. Internal system logs. Timestamps. A complaint filed 3 months ago. Severity level 4, potential food safety breach. Changed to level 1, customer dissatisfaction. Changed by M. Halstead. Sonia leaned forward. That's not a mistake. No, Frank said from the doorway. It is. She hadn't noticed him enter. He looked more tired than he had the night before. Not physically. Structurally. How many? She asked. Across 5 states, Diana replied. 12 confirmed so far. Sonia felt something colder than fear. Pattern means permission, which means someone believed this behavior would never be audited from above. And that's when Frank understood something else. The anonymous email wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone inside knew exactly which location would expose the chain. Someone wanted him there. Specifically. By noon, the story leaked. Not from corporate. From somewhere else. Luxury restaurant owner secretly closes flagship after allegations. The article was careful. Neutral tone. But the implication was clear. Crisis. Stock dipped 6% in 2 hours. The board called again. This is becoming reputationally dangerous. Frank responded calmly. No, he said. What's dangerous is what we haven't found yet. Martin Halstead requested a private meeting that afternoon. He arrived composed. Perfect suit. Perfect tone. This is an overreaction, Martin said evenly. Managers sometimes act independently. That doesn't mean systemic corruption. Frank watched him carefully. You altered reports. I applied professional judgment. You reduced severity classifications after settlements were paid. That was risk mitigation. The words were clean. Strategic. Legal. Frank leaned back. Who instructed you? Martin didn't hesitate. No one. Too fast. Frank slid a folder across the table. Vendor contracts. Insurance premium reductions. Internal bonus metrics. And one detail Martin hadn't anticipated. Executive compensation tied to incident reduction performance. Performance measured by reported severity. Not actual resolution. Silence shifted. You created incentive to bury harm, Frank said quietly. Martin's composure flickered for half a second. Then returned. It protected the company. No, Frank replied. It protected margins. And margins, when prioritized incorrectly, become moral debt. That evening, something else happened. Sonia's phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should walk away. No threat. Just suggestion. She didn't respond. 5 minutes later. Corporate loyalty doesn't protect outsiders. She stared at the screen. Not fear. Calculation. Because intimidation without specifics means the sender doesn't have leverage. Yet, she forwarded the messages to Diana. Within minutes, internal security traced the routing. Not external. Corporate VPN. Someone inside was nervous. By 8 p.m., Frank made a decision the board begged him not to make. He scheduled a press conference. Not to deny. Not to deflect. To disclose. The communications team pushed back. We can resolve this quietly. That's the problem, Frank replied. It's been quiet. The next morning, cameras lined the lobby. Investors watched live. Employees streamed internally. Frank stepped to the podium alone. No organization is immune to decay, he began calmly. And decay grows fastest in silence. He disclosed the internal investigation, the altered reports, the incentive structure flaw, the location closures pending audit. He didn't blame rogue managers. He didn't blame isolated actors. He blamed oversight failure. His own. Stock dropped another 3% in the first hour. Then something unexpected happened. Former employees began posting positive stories, stories of fairness, stories of opportunity, stories that contrasted the corruption now exposed. Because transparency creates contrast, and contrast creates trust. By afternoon, stock stabilized. By closing bell, it recovered 2%. Not full recovery, but momentum. Martin Halstead resigned that evening. Not terminated. Resigned. Legal positioning. But an external regulatory review had already been triggered, which meant documentation would go public anyway. Ricky Thornton was charged under state food safety violations. But the larger move wasn't punishment. It was structural reform. Frank dissolved the entire internal compliance department, rebuilt it independent of executive compensation metrics, created an external oversight board with rotating civilian members. And then he did something that stunned the industry. He appointed Sonia Williams as Deputy Director of Ethical Operations. Not symbolic, operational, with authority to escalate without executive interference. The press called it risky. The board called it emotional. Frank called it correction. Late that night, alone again in his penthouse, Frank reopened the original anonymous email. He had traced it now. Not to Martin. Not to a manager. To a mid-level data analyst in another state. A quiet employee who noticed pattern irregularities in severity downgrades. Who realized escalation wouldn't work. So he engineered visibility. By baiting the founder himself. Frank smiled faintly. The stake had been bait. But not for him. For the truth. Weeks later, La Meridian reopened under new management. Transparent kitchen policy. Open audit reporting. Public compliance dashboard. Industry analysts called it a dangerous level of transparency. Customers called it trust. Sonia stood in the reopened dining room during the soft launch. Not as a server. As oversight. Watching. Not for mistakes. For culture. Frank approached quietly. You changed the trajectory of this company, he said. She shook her head. You just decided to look. He nodded once. Fair. Because leadership isn't about never failing. It's about refusing to protect failure once you see it. The steak was never eaten. But it forced something larger to surface. And the empire that almost protected silence now couldn't afford to. If you were Sonia, would you risk stability for integrity? If you were Frank, would you expose your own system publicly knowing investors might panic? Be honest. Because most people say they value dignity. Until it costs them something. I'm reading every response. Real question. Is it stronger leadership to fix corruption quietly, or to expose it publicly even if it hurts your brand? If you were Sonia, would you risk your job to warn someone you didn't know? And if you were Frank, would you shut the place down quietly or expose everything publicly? Be honest, I'm reading every response. No emotion, just logic. I want real answers.